A U.S. soldier froze when dozens of American dog tags poured out of a German flour barrel onto the kitchen floor. But before anyone could react, a terrified prisoner dove through the spilled flour, trying to grab one specific tag, while another German smashed a lantern against the wall to darken the room. And the moment Patton stepped through the smoke and picked up a tag belonging to a missing American medic reported dead 2 weeks earlier, every officer in the camp stopped talking at once. The American troops entered the German camp after sunrise, moving past the broken gate with rifles raised and medics following behind them. The place had been abandoned too quickly. Coffee still steamed in tin cups, blankets hung over bunk rails, and the kitchen fires were warm enough to prove someone had left minutes before the Americans arrived. A sergeant ordered the prisoners and camp staff into the yard while a search team cleared the buildings. The German cook was found behind the kitchen counter with flour on his sleeves and a shaking hand inside his apron pocket. He claimed he had stayed only to feed the wounded men, but he would not move away from the flour barrels. One American guard pulled him forward, and something metal dropped from the apron into the mud. It landed with a small bright flash, and every soldier nearby turned at once. The guard picked it up, wiped it with his thumb, and saw an American name stamped into the steel. The cook grabbed for it before the guard could read the rest. 2 MPs shoved him against the counter, and another prisoner near the door lunged toward the mud as if the tag could still disappear. The room erupted in bodies, boots, shouted orders, and rifles raised toward men who suddenly looked too frightened to stand still. A corporal kicked the nearest flour barrel aside, and the lid broke loose. More metal pieces slid out with the flour, clattering across the floor like coins. Dog tags, American dog tags, some clean, some scratched, some tied to bits of cloth, spilled under the hanging light. Patton arrived at the kitchen doorway before the first count was finished. He had been inspecting the outer yard when the shouting began, and he stepped inside with mud on his boots, looking from the tags on the floor to the German cook, then to the officers gathered outside the window. The first tag read aloud belonged to a U.S. medic listed as missing during a convoy attack 2 weeks earlier. The second belonged to an infantry private. The third still had dried cloth tied through the chain hole, and the cloth carried a field hospital stamp that should never have been inside a German kitchen. The German camp commander claimed the tags had been collected from dead battlefield bodies for later reporting. Patton ordered him brought into the kitchen, then asked why battlefield effects were hidden in flour barrels instead of registered with prisoner records. The commander looked at the cook before answering, and that glance betrayed more than his words. A young German prisoner standing near the stove suddenly lifted his hands and pointed toward the cellar door. He said one American had been alive when his tag was taken. The cook shouted at him to be silent, and an MP struck the stove with his rifle, but to stop everyone from moving. Patton ordered the cellar opened immediately. The door had been barred from the outside with a broken chair leg. When the bar was removed, the smell of wet straw and medicine came up from the steps, and the medics moved before anyone gave them permission. The first conflict formed inside that kitchen. The Americans had not found souvenirs. They had found proof that missing U.S. soldiers had passed through this camp, and someone had taken their names, hidden them in flour, and hoped the army would never search deep enough to hear the cellar. Subscribe for more forgotten German POW stories like this one. The cellar search began with flashlights cutting across wet stone, empty bowls, and torn bandages. The first room held no prisoners, but the straw had body marks pressed into it, and an American boot lace lay near the wall. One medic picked it up without speaking and placed it in an evidence pouch. At the bottom of the second stairwell, an MP found scratches cut into the plaster. They were not random marks. They were initials, dates, and short lines carved by someone with metal. One set of initials matched the dog tag tied with the hospital cloth. Patton ordered the cellar cleared section by section. The German commander insisted no Americans remained in the camp, but the young German prisoner who had pointed to the cellar now said there had been 3 rooms, not 2. He walked to a stack of coal sacks and showed where the wall had been covered. The MPs pulled away the sacks and found a narrow wooden door hidden behind them. Its hinges had been packed with grease to stop squeaking. When they forced it open, the beam of a flashlight landed on an American field jacket folded neatly on a chair, with the name stripped torn off. The room beyond was empty, but not abandoned. A cup of water stood on the floor. A bloody bandage hung from a nail. A pencil mark on the wall counted 12 days. The medics moved in, and the German commander suddenly tried to step backward, only to be stopped by a guard at his shoulder. The escalation grew when a second barrel was opened in the kitchen. This one did not hold dog tags. It held letters, photographs, paybooks, and pocket Bibles wrapped in cloth. Some envelopes had American addresses. Others had been cut open and marked with German notes. Patton ordered 2 tables dragged into the yard, and every item placed in full view. The dog tags were laid on one table, the letters and effects on another. The German officers were forced to stand nearby while the names were read aloud and matched to missing reports from the American units. One name made an American lieutenant step forward. He recognized it as the name of a radio operator from his battalion, a man believed killed near a crossroads. The lieutenant grabbed the table edge when the man's photograph appeared from the barrel, showing a wife and child folded inside a Bible. The young German prisoner was brought forward again. He said the Americans had not all died together. Some arrived wounded, some arrived able to walk, and some were moved at night when inspectors or senior officers approached the camp. He pointed toward the motor shed at the far end of the yard. Patton sent a squad to the motor shed. They found a truck with fresh straw in the bed, a dark stain near the tailgate, and a hidden compartment beneath a loose plank. Inside the compartment were 3 more dog tags wrapped in oilcloth and a route map with 2 villages circled. The German commander claimed the truck had carried only supplies. The cook, now pale and silent, kept looking at the route map. Patton noticed and ordered the cook searched again. Inside his boot lining was a key tied to a piece of blue thread. The key opened a locked cabinet behind the kitchen stove. Inside were camp ledgers, not official ledgers, but private lists of American prisoners marked by health, rank, usefulness, and destination. The escalation had moved from hidden tags to a system that sorted living men like inventory. The major consequence came when the first circled village was searched before noon. American troops found a church basement with straw beds, medical wrappers, and a broken stretcher pole. No prisoners were there, but one wall held an American unit patch pressed into the mortar with a thumbprint of dried blood. A local farmer approached the patrol carrying a tin cup and a torn sleeve. Through the interpreter, he said wounded Americans had been brought through the village at night in a truck covered with canvas. He had heard English voices asking for water, but German guards pushed civilians away. The patrol returned with the farmer, the sleeve, and the stretcher pole. The sleeve matched the cloth tied to one dog tag from the flour barrel. Patton ordered the dog tag, sleeve, map, and farmer's statement placed together on the yard table, turning one missing soldier's path into a chain of proof. The German commander attempted to shift blame onto retreating units that had passed through the region. Patton answered by ordering his desk searched. In the bottom drawer, under blank forms, MPs found transport receipts signed by the commander for special wounded cargo, moved after dark. The receipts matched the route map from the truck compartment. One village had already been searched. The second was still unknown. The commander's face changed when the receipt with that village's name was read aloud, because the date was only 2 days old. The American lieutenant demanded permission to lead the next patrol himself. Patton gave it, but ordered medics, photographers, and an interpreter to go with him. This was no longer only a search for prisoners. It had become an evidence trail tied to American dead and possibly living men. At the second village, the patrol found a locked schoolhouse. Inside were cots, food scraps, and a chalkboard with English words written badly across the bottom. Not dead. Moved east. The message had been wiped once, but the chalk dust remained in the cracks. Behind the schoolhouse, They found a shallow storage cellar with 3 American soldiers alive, weak, and wrapped in German blankets. One had no dog tag. Another had a chain around his neck with nothing attached. The third kept repeating that his name was still his name, as if someone had tried to take it from him. The rescued men were rushed back to the camp under guard. When the first ambulance entered the yard, every American soldier turned toward the dog tag table. One rescued man saw the tags and pointed with a shaking hand to one lying near the front. It was his own. That moment changed the entire camp. The dog tags were no longer evidence only of death. They had been stripped from living men, hidden, moved, and separated from bodies to erase identity before transport. The consequence was immediate and explosive. Patton relieved the German commander from any remaining authority, placed the cook, the private clerk, and 2 transport guards under separate armed watch, and froze every record inside the camp. No wagon, ledger, box, or barrel could move without American approval. By sunset, the camp had turned into a military crime scene. The dog tags from the flour barrel sat beside living witnesses, rescued men, and signed transport papers. The discovery had moved from shock to consequence, because every hidden object now pointed to a deliberate effort to make American prisoners disappear before the army reached them. The major reversal began when one rescued American soldier asked to see the German prisoner who had pointed to the cellar door. The guards brought the young German forward carefully, expecting accusation or anger, but the rescued soldier lifted his hand and said the German had secretly given him water. The young German prisoner was named Lucas Bauer, a kitchen helper forced to work under the cook. He admitted he had hidden one dog tag, not to erase it, but to save it from being thrown into the river with the others. He said the flour barrel was not his hiding place at first. It had become the only place the cook never allowed guards to inspect. Patton ordered Lucas questioned separately, and the story reversed. The dog tags had been collected by German officers to erase American identities, but Lucas had moved some of them from a disposal sack into the flour, hoping Americans would search the kitchen before the camp was emptied. The cook shouted that Lucas was lying to save himself. Patton ordered the flour barrel turned over completely. At the bottom, wrapped in waxed paper, was a small note written in broken English. Names here. Some alive. Do not stop. The handwriting matched the pencil marks in the hidden cellar. The rescued American recognized the phrase. He said he had taught Lucas the words during a night in the cellar after realizing the young German understood only fragments of English. The reversal widened at once. The most suspicious discovery in the kitchen was also a rescue attempt hidden inside the enemy camp. Lucas then revealed the next location. He said one group of Americans had been moved toward an old brick kiln beyond the orchard, but one prisoner was too sick to move and had been hidden in a drainage room behind the camp laundry. He had not spoken earlier because the cook's assistant was still loose. A search party ran to the laundry. Behind stacked tubs and coal bins, they found a narrow room with one American soldier alive, feverish, and barely able to speak. Around his neck was a German string holding a blank metal washer where his dog tag should have been. The cook's assistant was caught trying to leave through a rear fence with a sack over his shoulder. Inside the sack were more dog tags, 2 American watches, and a list of names marked disposal before arrival. He had been preparing to remove the last proof while the yard watched the rescued men. Patton ordered the assistant dragged to the evidence table and forced to stand beside Lucas. The contrast was visible to everyone. One German kitchen worker had hidden names so Americans could find them, while the other had tried to carry names away. The reversal became public when the rescued soldier placed his own recovered tag in Lucas's hand for a moment, then took it back and nodded. He was not thanking a friend, and no one pretended the war had become gentle. But the yard saw that the hidden dog tags were not only signs of cruelty. Some were also acts of resistance by people trapped inside the system. By evening, Lucas was moved under American protection as a witness, and the cook was isolated with the transport guards. The flour barrel that first looked like a grave of names had become the object that saved the living men those names belonged to. The final irreversible event began at the brick kiln before dawn. American troops surrounded the old structure with medics behind them and a photographer ready near the road. Smoke still drifted from the chimney, though no work crew was supposed to be there. Inside the kiln, they found burned papers, torn uniforms, and a locked iron box pushed into a cooling chamber. The box was too hot to touch at first, and one soldier used a shovel to drag it into the open. When it was broken apart, a final bundle of American dog tags spilled onto the ground. These tags were different. Several still had chains attached. Others were tied in groups with wire. At the bottom of the box was a field roster torn from an American unit book, with names crossed out and replaced by German transport numbers. A weak sound came from beneath the kiln platform. The troops pulled away loose bricks and found a crawl space holding 2 American prisoners and 1 German orderly who had stayed with them. The orderly had hidden the men when the transport guards tried to move them during the night. The 2 Americans were carried into daylight. One saw the dog tags from the iron box and began naming men who had been moved before him. His voice was weak, but each name was written down, and each tag was placed into a numbered row. The final link came from the German orderly. He handed over a torn page from the cook's private ledger, showing that the dog tags had been scheduled for destruction at the kiln before American units arrived. The flour barrel had been only the first hiding place. The kiln was the final disposal point. Patton ordered all evidence transported back to camp in separate crates. Kitchen tags, cellar marks, transport receipts, living witness statements, and kiln tags. He did not allow the German commander or cook to see the crates together. They had lost the ability to control the pattern. At the camp yard, every recovered tag was laid out under guard. Living men identified their own. Others were matched to missing reports. A few remained unmatched, and those were placed in a separate box marked for continued search rather than burial. The German commander made one final claim that the records had been confused by the chaos of retreat. Patton ordered Lucas, the rescued soldiers, the farmer, the orderly, and the American lieutenant to stand beside the tables. The confusion claim collapsed in front of the witnesses and the objects. Before noon, Patton signed the order placing the camp command staff, kitchen staff, and transport guards under formal investigation. Every building in the camp was sealed, every ledger seized, and every German prisoner connected to the prisoner transports separated by roll. The final irreversible moment came when the first rescued American soldier fastened his recovered dog tag back around his neck. The sound of the metal closing was small, but every man nearby heard it. His name had been hidden in flour, moved through cellars, and carried toward fire, but it had returned to him before the men who stole it could erase the trail. The evidence convoy left that afternoon with the dog tags under armed guard, while the rescued Americans were sent to a field hospital. The camp no longer held secrets in barrels, cellars, or kilns. The names had come back into the open, and the men who tried to hide them were now tied to every link in the chain. 3 days later, the recovered dog tags were counted again under American supervision, separated into living, missing, and confirmed witness files. The first rescued soldier signed beside his own name with the tag resting against his chest, while Lucas Bauer gave his statement under guard nearby. When the final crate was sealed for headquarters, the flour dust was still caught in the chains, a quiet proof that the names had been buried in a kitchen, but not deeply enough to stay lost. Most people know how World War II ended. Very few know what happened inside these prison camps. Subscribe for more untold WWII stories.